no bad energy. Try to be the best you.
Okay.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today we are doing another team preview, a very interesting team, a very different team, and lots of information for us to get to. We're looking at the LA Clippers. Michael Bolton, he is ready.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed, and to talk about the Clippers, I am joined by one of the hosts of the Locked On Clippers podcast. William Updyke is here. William, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Josh.
Pretty exciting time for you over at Locked On Clippers with all of the moves that the Clippers made, putting themselves right in the discussion to be the favourites for the NBA title. Lots of stuff for you to get your head around, so I'm going to press you on questions here. Let's start off with this one, though. Looking at Paul George, how's his shoulder?
Shoulder is pretty good. He's got he's got injuries on both of them, so you love to start out the season that way. I guess after watching that run, I was initially a lot more worried about it until the diagnosis was truly finalized there. So I do think that we will be missing him for, at least the first month, I would guess, of the season.
Yeah, I've sort of got him coming back middle of November, so missing 9 to 15 games sort of a range at the beginning of the season. And then I think that, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that they will be instituting some rest days for him, especially through those first 2-3 months after he returns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for him and Kawhi both, we have a little bit of a rough start to the beginning of the season. So I do think that we will see that. But luckily, I feel like with where we're at right now, the team is deep enough to really be able to accommodate that. And I'm actually really interested to see how they run that, if they do end up sitting Kawhi full games, and how they ease Paul George in, because I think that, they could do it similar to the blueprint that the Raptors laid out last year for Kawhi, or they could just do something where he is maybe playing in more games, but his usage just a lot lower.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing there. I guess the Clippers have 13 back-to-backs this season, so you think there's a realistic chance that both Paul George and Kawhi miss a good chunk of those 13 games, plus any other injuries that Kawhi might sustain throughout the year, and of course Paul George starting the season with an injury. It makes the back end of the first round of a fantasy draft really tough, because both of those guys on a per-game basis are in that mix. They're in that 8 to 12 sort of a range, but if they're going to miss 20 games apiece each, which is a definite possibility, especially for George if he's missing the start of the season, it makes it really hard to take those guys. Now, George may be a bit easier if he's going to miss the beginning of the season, but he's going to be right for head-to-head playoffs. You feel a little bit better, but who knows how they're going to run things with George and with the fun guy in terms of how they're going to manage him. They are definitely... I think there's zero chance either of these guys play 70 games.
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree. I do think that is one part that would be a bummer if you're looking at taking Clippers players in the draft. It would just be that I don't think we're going to be prioritizing the regular season beyond just trying to hold down a home seed.
I agree. That's exactly how I see it with those guys. So, look, in certain draft formats, you can take them. I grabbed Kawhi at the start of a second round in a roto draft. I think there's value in getting him in that area. But if you're looking at 7, 8, that sort of zone where these guys can be on a per game basis, it's pretty tough in a head-to-head league, just not knowing exactly when these games are going to be sat out, and the uncertain start to the season that Paul George has. It makes me pretty weary about taking those guys at their per game projections. They're ranked on ESPN at 9 and 10, so back-to-back, and 10 and 13 on Yahoo, and there's an element of risk in grabbing those guys there just because of those issues that we have already mentioned with both Leonard and George. How they fit together is going to be interesting. I think their best bet is to play them at the 3 and the 4, but there's rumours or whispers coming out that, like so many of these superstar players, they refuse to play the positions that best suit them and the team, that they're going to want to play at the 2 and the 3. Is that how you see it working out? I would love to have Landry Shamot in there next to them, but I've heard whispers that maybe they look for JaMychal Green to start at the 4, so George and Leonard play the 2 and the 3.
So I think a lot of this is actually going to be determined during this stretch of games while Paul George is out. I don't see a scenario in which Landry Shamot isn't in the starting lineup while George is resting.
I agree.
And I think it's really going to depend on how Shamot grows, both on the defensive end of the floor, as well as how much he can grow as like a facilitator or more of a playmaking guard, just because that is something that, if we're starting Patrick Beverley, he's maybe doesn't have the highest assist numbers. Last year he was used a lot more in in a catch and shoot kind of role. He wasn't necessarily super active in the guard position with Shea handling the point the majority of the time. So I think that if Shamot can establish himself as a little bit more of a playmaker, add a little bit of a wrinkle offensively, as well as continue to play defense at least at a net neutral level, which he did get better through that playoff stretch. I think that we could see him starting at the 2 with George and Kawhi pushed down a position. But in the absence of that, it will most likely be George at the 2, Kawhi playing his regular small forward role, and JaMychal Green at the power forward.
Even if they do start with JaMychal Green at power forward, I don't think he's playing typical starters minutes. I think he comes in and plays 20, 21, 22 minutes sort of a thing, and he's not going to be any real threat to be a standard league guy. Yahoo's got him ranked 150th. I don't know why. They got him 154th on ESPN. I also don't know why. He's just not going to have that sort of opportunity, I don't believe, to be playing 30 minutes a night. And even in times when he's played 30 a night as a member of the Grizzlies, he hasn't been an excellent fantasy value guy. Now, he did take steps forward last season, JaMychal Green, but I don't really see them necessarily being consistent enough this year.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that if he's somebody you can pick up late, there's possibly some value there. But as you said, he's not going to be a 30-minute per game guy. I think that's like the double-edged sword, I guess, in terms of especially fantasy when looking at this roster, is that it's so deep front to back that it's going to be a pretty rarefied occasion that many guys are playing, more than, 22, 25 minutes, especially these guys, especially like, JaMychal Greens and Zubac, certainly. Even probably Montrezl Harrell we'll see a dip in minutes to the amount that he played last year.
Harrell's an interesting one because I talked about him potentially not, well, I can't remember exactly how it worked. I think I talked about a breakout player from the Clippers, and someone said, why not Harrell? He's going to really step up. He's going to have a big year. And I don't think that's going to be the case for Harrell. I think it's going to be harder for him this season. There's going to be potentially fewer minutes, but also he's just not going to get that same level of shots because it's not going to be just him playing on the bench and Kawhi and Paul George playing in the starting lineup. There's going to be mixes between those two. So you're not going to have as many opportunities for Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell to run that pick and roll. So I don't necessarily see him having as good of a season as he had last year. And that was a season where he took some big steps forward in his block numbers, especially almost went from 1.4 to 1.8 blocks per 36, which is a pretty significant rise, and that actually fell off towards the end of the season. I just don't see Harrell. I don't see how he actually improves on his numbers from last year.
Yeah, so I would have to agree with you there. It's going to be a lot harder in limited time. I do think that he could see some slight improvements. Mainly his rebounding numbers is what I would like to see improved. I think that his assist numbers could go up just with the greater amount of shooters and floor spacing on the second unit. But yeah, like you said, I don't think that he had such a great season last year. I think that we might see it stay at this homeostasis level or maybe slight improve. But I don't know. He would just have to do a lot more in less time to really have another breakout season like last year.
I think that, look, he's fine inside the top 100, but ESPN got him at 54. That's too high. Fantrax ADP's got him at 62. That's too high in my opinion as well. He finished last year as the 71st ranked player, which is all well and good. But again, getting to that level again with the added talent around, and especially when so much of his value came from the fact that he was having such a high usage, that makes me skeptical that he's going to be able to replicate and improve on that. I just don't think that we're going to see that from Harrell this season. And similarly, a guy that won the 6th Man of the Year award, Lou Williams, it's going to be harder for him to be able to replicate that as well. Not that he's not going to be good, because he is. We know that. It's just having those other guys around mean he doesn't have to have that absolutely sky-high usage rate. They can go a little bit easier on Williams in terms of playing time. And we've seen that even from the 17-18 season where he played a ton of minutes. Last year's team more talented.
Yes.
Those minutes dropped right down. And I think we could see that happen again this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we'll see that lower, but once again, I think that he could have. I think that he could have another career best year in terms of assists, just because we at the guard we are going to need guys to be more playmakers to add a threat from like a facilitating role.
He had like 5.3 assists per game last year. I think that can go up marginally, but maybe a half assist in a game, it can go up there. But I just don't think that he's going to necessarily be a 20-point per game guy again. Maybe a little bit under that, just with these other guys around and trying to, I guess, limit some of the load that was on him. He had a 34% usage rate last season, which is insanely high. I don't think he's going to be able to maintain that level.
No, and I mean the thing is he just doesn't need to either.
Exactly.
With the roster construction, there's just no purpose in like running him out at that high of a usage rate.
The other guy who is pretty much locked in, I think, as a starter is Patrick Beverley, who I think would surprise people with some of the fantasy numbers he put up last year. I think he can be a borderline top 100 guy again, and is really lowly ranked, 162 on Yahoo, 124 on ESPN.
That's a steal.
Go ahead.
That's a steal to me.
I agree completely. Now, last year he was the 142nd ranked player, but over the final 37 games, he was the 74th ranked player. He played 30 minutes a night during that time frame. He averaged 6 boards and 4.4 assists. And Paul George and Kawhi are decent passers, but they're not great passers. Someone's going to have to distribute. He's still a strong rebounder. He's still going to get those steals. And part of the reason his overall season rank was down is his steal rate had dropped way off. He'd been at 1.7 and 1.5 each of the last 2 seasons. And overall last season was just 0.9. So that can go back up. I think that he is a guy you definitely look at in those last rounds, because that is a real steal for me for Beverley. And I think that 30 minutes a night for him should be what we're looking at, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I think that he can definitely handle that sort of load. I think that his rebounding last year, especially in the latter half of the season, really stuck out to me. Like it was impressive for a 6'1" guard. Just he has those defensive instincts where he just is always in the right place at the right time. And I mean, I would be pretty surprised if we didn't see his assist rate go up. He's about a 3.5 per game kind of guy. I mean, if he's going to be running the point at that 30 minutes a night sort of number, I would be really surprised if that number stayed below 5 per game, but we'll see.
The other guy who I think would be the smart choice to have in that starting lineup, and will definitely start at least when Paul George is out, is Landry Shamot, who had a fantastic rookie season, unbelievable shooting numbers, 42% from 3, but of course did absolutely nothing else. No rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, very limited scoring, and doesn't get to the free throw line. Are any of those things going to change?
Yeah, so I do. I think that I think that Landry did the best with the role that he was in, which was, mainly a spot-up guy. We would occasionally get him some, like, he would occasionally just run motion on offense, like just running through screens and just kind of being a magnet for the defense. I do think that we could see some added pieces to his game. If you look at his Wichita State highlights, he scored in a variety of ways. He was able to cut to the basket. He ran the point at a much higher level. I mean, albeit for Wichita. So I do think that we could see him ingrained in the offense in a little bit more unique ways versus just kind of standing around and shooting from 3.
In the last 2 months of last season, he played 28 minutes a night and still couldn't crack the top 200 in fantasy, because all he did, he hit threes and he hit them really well. Obviously, fantastic shooting, 44%, 2.7 a game, but just nothing else. And I don't really see him adding rebounds and assists to his game this year. And I think he might also be a guy that has to cede some usage to these other players.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's apt. I mean, it's going to be really hard to see how they find minutes for all these guys once the roster is fully healthy. He in the playoffs he played really well against with Lou Will in that second unit. So I would think that that'll be where he'll see the most minutes. I would imagine him probably transitioning out of the starting lineup once Paul George and Kawhi are healthy. But as I said at the top, that things could change if he is able to step up defensively and add some sort of just more depth to his offensive game. I mean, it was a little one dimensional from last season. So we'll see if he can improve on that.
I don't think you should really be considering him in any sort of standard league. He's great as a three-point streaming option, but outside of that, there's just too many other deficiencies in what he does and the role that he's asked to play. Another guy who's in for a worse season this year than what he had last season is Mo Harkless, who will probably get more minutes on those nights when Kawhi and Paul George are out, or one of those two are out, but overall he's just going to be playing that interesting backup 3, backup 4 sort of a role. I'd actually prefer him starting over JaMychal Green, to be honest, but that's not the inkling I get from how the Clippers are going to run things. He's a useful player. He blocks shots. He gets steals. His three-point shooting fell off completely last season, 28%. But he did start to pick it up a bit towards the end of last season, his overall play. But it wasn't the greatest year for Harkless, and now he finds himself in a situation where he probably won't play as many minutes as he did in Portland.
No, and he, especially he's not going to get a lot of touches offensively. He is there to help cover positions when you have Lou Williams and Landry Shamot as kind of sibs on the defensive end. I don't think that I don't really necessarily see how he's going to fit into the offense on the second unit with Montrezl Harrell kind of already being like the role man. Maybe they use Harkless in that way, but he's not really a shooter. Getting to the line also wouldn't be that effective for him. He's like a 67% free throw shooter. So I think from other than defensive stats, you're probably not going to be getting a whole lot out of Mo Harkless. But I would like to be surprised. He is a guy that I am kind of excited to see how they use him this year and what he's able to provide.
It's a great pickup for the Clippers. I just don't think it's going to have too much of an impact from a fantasy perspective. The other guy who is in that starting lineup is Ivica Zubac, who came across last season at the trade deadline. He provided pretty strong value in that time frame, but of course with Montrezl Harrell there, his minutes and his role are fairly limited to about probably 19 to 20 minutes a game. He blocks some shots, he's got good field goal percentage, but he's just limited by the fact that Harrell is around.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had a tough go last year. He had, he had like a dislocated finger and a broken finger. So his touch was notably affected. He wasn't finishing around the basket as well as he normally does. On the season, he did still finish at 54% from the field. So, solid, not as good as Harrell was. And the big thing was defensively, he was played off the floor in the Warriors series. So I think that's going to be that's going to be a big thing that's going to determine his playing minutes. But I would predict, that it's going to be right around that probably 19-ish minute mark. Also, just depending on if they end up playing smaller with JaMychal at the 5 with Landry Shamot and George and Kawhi in the starting lineup with Pat or Lou.
They brought in a couple of veterans, one last season, one this season, Patrick Patterson and Rodney Magruder, but they're really just insurance policies at this point, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk some younger guys then. Jerome Robinson, who was picked after Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last season. It wasn't quite the same rookie season from Jerome Robinson. Is there any hope for him to crack into the rotation? It seems like it's going to be tough for me.
I think it's going to be really tough. I think he had a promising show once in the playoff series against the Warriors. He was playing pretty intelligent defense, heads up defense. But I think that this is a guy that if you can get him late, if you can get him way late, I do think that he'll see improved numbers from last year. Obviously, he was out for a majority of the regular season with a foot injury, spent a lot of time in the G League where he was really, really solid. But yeah, he still doesn't have those NBA legs beneath him. And the fact that we've already added another young guard does make me worry about his role and playing time moving forward.
He's another one of those guys who can score, but no rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks. Yeah, the efficiency wasn't where it needed to be last season. He just finding those minutes. I just don't see it for Robinson. I don't think he's ever going to translate to become an NBA starter. I hated the pick at the time. It was it's been proven right so far through 1 year. Let's give him a little bit more before I completely write him off. But wasn't great stuff.
It was very
from,
perplexing.
What was that?
Yeah, it was a perplexing pick. It was he had worked out with the team the summer before, and I guess there is faith in the front office that he is going to develop into something. I cannot see what that something is going to be.
Yeah, it's hard to see where his role actually lies for this team. Now, this season's first rounder, Fiondu Kabengele, who had some concerns with knee injuries. Apparently, he's all healthy there. I thought looked pretty good in summer league. He's going to be profiling as that third center behind Zubac and Harrell. But were you impressed with what Kabengele showed through Vegas?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was impressed. He can stretch the floor a little bit, which I wasn't really surprised. Which I was really surprised at. He's super athletic. Once again, though, the thing that's going to hold back his playing time is he's just kind of another one of those tweener guys. That 6'10" kind of range, but that Montrezl Harrell size, but he's a lot slimmer and younger, obviously. So I think that he is going to spend the majority of his time in the G League. I don't really see him getting a whole lot of run.
Let's Terrence Mann, another guy in summer league who put up some interesting numbers as a weird point guard who was not scoring and not shooting, but grabbing huge rebounds and assists. Do they envisage him as a point guard?
So at the playbook for like the ticket holder event for the Clippers, Jerry West made the bold claim that before the end of the season, he was going to make a prediction that we would be seeing quite a bit of Terrence Mann. So I guess if you trust the logo, then he's going to be getting some playing time. I like what I've seen of Mann. I do. I like the passing game. I like the rebounding. I do think that some of it is not going to translate to the next level. I do think that he has a little bit of that kind of Shea game where he's like very long and lean and can use, even if he's not the most athletic, he can kind of use like tempo and just little different wrinkles to kind of elevate his game a little bit further. I think if he does end up being like the next, if he ends up being the player who's directly training under Sam Cassell, I do think that could be really good for his game. I think that he could really foster that into being, a more facilitating guard. Not going to be a big scorer unless he's really able to get to the rim. Like physically, he's a little bit more developed. Obviously, being an older rookie coming in, so he does have that going for him. But yeah, I don't know what to expect. I'm really excited for him. I do think that if he can establish just being able to stay consistent with that sort of playmaking. There was some really kind of careless passes even in summer league that's not going to fly at the NBA level. But if he can kind of facilitate, that's a good way for him to carve out 10 to 12 minutes a game. But that I see as being, very far off.
Look out, Jerome Robinson. One question on this team in general. They played at a decently fast pace last season. Do you think they'll play faster or slower with all these changes?
I am seeing it kind of more slowed down, especially without Shea in the lineup. I do think that the tempo will slow down. The second unit will continue to be what it is, which is just Lou Williams and Trez kind of feeling it out, working in the half court as they do. This isn't going to be a team that's like really rushing out in transition, or like that's not how we're going to be doing the majority of our scoring. I think it's going to be a lot more methodical set. So I'm curious to see how Doc is able to use all these pieces, because I think we have a pretty clear idea what it's going to look like defensively. I'm actually just a little bit more unsure how it's going to work with Beverley running the point and these two superstars. all trying to coexist with the pieces around them.
Yeah, it is going to be intriguing to see how this all works out, of course. Expectations are very high for the Clippers for this coming season, but huge question marks over guys like Kawhi and Paul George in terms of where you take them in fantasy. If I'm looking at some value picks, I think that Patrick Beverley is the value pick there. Yahoo's got him at 122, ESPN lower, and I also think, as I mentioned earlier, Montrezl Harrell is a bust pick at 54. I like Harrell. I don't think it's worth taking pick 54 on him over there.
That's a little high.
Will, thanks for jumping on and talking about the Clippers with me today. Give us a plug of your socials and Locked On Clippers.
Yeah, sure thing. So coming at you 5 days a week with all the fresh Clippers info. You can reach me at Will Updyke on Twitter. You can reach my co-host at Charles Mockler, also on Twitter, and be sure to check us out at Locked On Clips. We love to hear from you. We'll be live tomorrow.
So go and check out Will and Charles over on Locked On Clippers. Will, thanks for jumping on with me.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Josh.
All right, guys, that'll wrap it up for today's show. Subscribe to this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube, of course. Give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts is a fantastic way of supporting the program. Check out the rest of the podcasts that we've done in the team preview series as well, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Rodney Magruder.